Shabbat Shalom, everyone. One of my favorite films of all time is the 1931 version of Frankenstein. Interestingly enough, the depiction of the creature shown in this movie, and if we asked people, what does Frankenstein look like, they would tell us, kind of green, bolts on the neck. That's nothing like that of Mary Shelley's actual novel. But everyone associates the image of Boris Karloff from the movie with that of Frankenstein's monster. In fact, I looked this up. Shelley's monster wasn't green at all. It was Jack Pierce, nice Jewish boy, who was the makeup monster artist at the time for Universal Studios. He created that special mint green tint of grease paint for the monster because he thought it would look more corpse-like on black and white film. So you can find pictures of Boris Karloff in the makeup chair, happily smiling and smoking a cigarette, chatting with Pierce, because the application process to put on all of this stuff was very long and very invasive. Supposedly it would take up to 8 hours to apply layer after layer after layer of collodion and gum to make that big forehead. Legend has it that the combined weight of all the makeup and all the prosthetics that Karloff wore weighed more than 48 pounds, sometimes as much as 68 pounds. Although Pierce was proud of his work, he knew the image of the makeup was so powerful that he refused to let any of the actors in the movie see Karloff until it was time to begin filming. So the studio would cover Boris Karloff's head with a burlap sack while they moved him around the Universal Studios lot. Suffice to say, a lot of effort was put into making Karloff look less human, but I think the results are worth it. Frankenstein was a box office hit, and it still ranks as the 87th greatest movie of all time, according to the American Film Institute. Now, another monster many audiences are familiar with is that of Pharaoh from the Exodus story. It was common for Egyptian royalty to profess to their subjects that they were far superior than the average person, and oftentimes Egyptian kings or pharaohs preached that they were in fact gods themselves. Historically, we know from images and hieroglyphs painted on Egyptian temples that kings or pharaohs were believed to have had divine origins. The cycle of divine birth, these are usually painted on their tombs. They typically showed the Egyptian creator god Amun-Ra taking the form of a human man to impregnate the woman chosen to give birth to the future king. She was the human vessel within which the purely divine seed of the creator could grow. Thoth, the Egyptian god of knowledge and writing, he would appear to the woman to reveal that she was to give birth to the son of the creator. Now, depending on what era or what dynasty the particular pharaoh existed in, he would be considered an incarnation of Horus, which was a falcon-looking god, and he was the son of Osiris, or the divine king slain by his brother Seth. For Egyptians, kingship meant that their king was a living God who was able to lead the people of Egypt through all aspects of society. So when they went through relentless detail to make sure that their pharaoh or king appeared as if they were superhuman, an example of this depiction is what historians call the smiting image. This is an actual thing. This image would be an artistic rendering, and they would paint huge pictures, usually on a temple wall, or they'd make a big statue, and they would make their king, even if he was like 11 years old, as a supreme warlord. The image would usually portray Pharaoh, and he'd be armed to the teeth with weapons. And usually he'd be fighting somebody way bigger than him, still kicking his tuchus. Sometimes this actually happened, but rarely. And sometimes the Pharaoh would be painted as tackling a whole team of bad guys, one versus a dozen. No problem. He could do it all by himself. Another attempt to shield Pharaoh from his divine image was to prevent the public from seeing him do any human or what was considered a bodily activity. So they would hide Pharaoh all by himself, and that's where he would eat his meals, secluded, totally away from everyone, suggesting that he could receive all the energy he needed just from absorbing the power of the sun. They thought of Pharaoh as having like photosynthesis, like a plant, I guess. But perhaps the most odd Egyptian royalty ritual was the idea that because the pharaohs were actually gods themselves, historians will tell you that the pharaohs would proclaim to their public that they, how do I put this nicely, that they didn't need to use the restroom. They were so divine and so godlike, they didn't need to purchase Charmin at H-E-B. As odd as this sounds, this idea was prevalent in the ancient world. And our rabbis and our sages, they knew all about it. In fact, Rashi, who was a medieval French rabbi and he was a commentator on the Bible, notices a verse from last week's Parsha. Very interesting. It's the Torah tells us, quote, "Go to Pharaoh in the morning, for he goes out into the water, and you shall stand by the river's edge to meet him, and the rod which was turned into a serpent you should take in your hand." Now, Rashi understands the true reason why he thinks Pharaoh is standing in the water of the Nile. He writes, not my idea, he writes, "Behold, he is going forth to the water to relieve himself. For he had defiled himself and said he did not need to relieve himself. So early in the morning, he went out into the Nile, and there he would perform his needs." Now, I know this is crazy, that the leader of an enormous country would promote the idea that he doesn't need to use the bathroom. That's asinine. But would you believe if I told you that this sentiment is still around today? In North Korea, the cult of personality, as it is called, produced a number of brochures insisting that the late leader Kim Jong-il never used the restroom. Mazel tov to him. Likewise, they also assert that he was born of a supernatural birth and could control the weather based on his mood. That would be very convenient. My favorite anecdote from the brochure is they said that Kim Jong-il was playing golf and almost got a hole-in-one, but didn't quite make it, so he just easily tilted the earth so the ball could go in. It's good to be the king, I'm telling you. You would assume this whole theory of being divine and having a physical body superior to everyone else would be scoffed at when the pharaoh eventually died. This just in, they all died. But for Egyptians, the death of one's body wasn't seen as a weakness. It was merely a transition from this life to the next. They thought of the body as merely a vehicle for ruling in one kingdom, and a pharaoh could easily rule in the next kingdom in the afterlife, provided that they had all the necessary items when they died. This is why, if you excavate a pyramid or a tomb of a pharaoh, you will see that they mummify their pets, they mummify their favorite foods, and unfortunately, if you were one of their servants, sometimes they also mummified their butler Jeeves as well. They would want to enjoy all of these people while they ruled in the afterlife. So in a sense, Egyptians almost don't even believe in death. And as strange as that sounds, crazy as that sounds, as asinine as it sounds, this theory still permeates parts of American culture today. For instance, I don't even want to say this out loud, but I'm going to. The Church of Scientology. this is official church doctrine, just ask Tom Cruise, still maintains that the church founder, L. Ron Hubbard, did not die, even though he had a stroke and passed away. No, he didn't die. He discarded his body after reaching peak thetan levels. I don't really know what that means, but there you go. So why go through so much effort to seem less human? While it's admirable to want to become closer to God, it's dangerous, not to mention absurd, to try and replicate God's majesty. In this week's Torah portion, it seems as if Pharaoh is close to doing his own teshuvah and finally acknowledging that the God of the enslaved Hebrews is in fact the true God, not him. We have in chapter 10, verse 16, Pharaoh begs for God to remove the locusts. Locusts are like grasshoppers on steroids, big, crazy bugs. He says, I stand guilty before Adonai your God and before you. Forgive my offense just this once and plead with Hashem your God that he but remove these awful locusts from me. But even after God removes the bugs and sends them to die in the Nile, Pharaoh is back to his old schemes. He still acts as if he is the one responsible for removing the bugs. He's like the Orkin man. We know from Rashi's anecdote that Pharaoh is someone who knew he could never compete with the God of the Hebrews. Nonetheless, he still wanted to deceive his Egyptian followers into believing that he was above the things of the common person. Friends, under Frankenstein's makeup, there's simply just a polite British gentleman named Boris Karloff. Under the media's guise of divinity, Kim Jong-il and his putz of a son, Kim Jong-un for that matter, are just another set of Korean dictators with illusions of grandeur. L. Ron Hubbard, I don't know if you know this, L. Ron Hubbard, the guy who created Scientology, was a science fiction writer. In fact, he won the Guinness Book of World Records for the most amount of written things ever. He had a bunch of celebrity endorsements, but just like every other Egyptian king, he died. Just like the Pharaoh of the Exodus lived and died. So what can we learn from this? Perhaps we can benefit from all these absurd practices and own up to the fact that we are just human beings and we're prone to behavior that is oftentimes less than magnificent. That's expected. We're only human after all. However, if we humble ourselves in the way we interact with other people, if we avoid looking like we want to be a God and appear as a person who wants to seek God, this is what our tradition is supposed to encourage. We don't need to look like Frankenstein's monster to live extraordinarily. Rather than screaming, "It's alive!" we need to shout, "L'chaim," and live a Torah life. Shabbat Shalom.